The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the CFRE Application Process Step-by-Step webinar. We'll be going over how to fill out the application, and we're joined today by Jill Davis, Certification Coordinator, who will be answering questions on the back end, as well as Ashley Gatewood, our Communications and Marketing Manager, who will also be typing questions on the back end and reading some questions out during the break. I'm Paul Cavazos. I'm the Certification Manager. And I'll be going through this process with you. Please note that all lines are muted. If you have any questions, please type them into the question pane, and we will be answering them periodically throughout the webinar. If your question was not answered, or if it's a specific question about something in your application, please feel free to email that question to us at succeed@cfre.org. All questions asked during the webinar will be treated as anonymous. Okay, well, with that being said, let's get started. So we'll start with some frequently asked questions. These are the questions that we receive most commonly related to how to fill out the application, and of course about this webinar. So the first one being that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending a recording of this webinar to all registrants within 24 hours. The application fee is standard $875 US, but we do offer a 20% discount to those candidates who belong to one of our participating organizations. That would bring the cost down to $700 US for that application fee if you do belong to at least one of those partner organizations. You can find a list of those organizations within the application itself during step 1 or on our website under participating organizations. Today's webinar is not eligible for points on the application. So if I see this listed on your application, unfortunately, I'm going to have to reject it and give you 0 points for it because it's not eligible. Only webinars related to fundraising specific topics would qualify. So how to begin? You'll want to start off by going to our website at www.cfre.org. That's where you can create an account and start the application process. You'll input all of your data into the application, select an exam window, review your application for accuracy, then submit and pay. Please note that no payment is required until you actually submit, so you're welcome to continue through the application process as long as you need to continue to update and edit and save your data and then come back and finish it. And once you're done, you can submit and pay. Once you do submit, CFRE staff will review the application for accuracy and to ensure that everything listed meets our guidelines. Once you're approved, you'll be sent additional information on how to schedule your exam. We do partner with Pearson VUE, and they do have several thousand testing facilities all across the globe. So as part of the application process, after you're approved, you'll be sent information on how to schedule your exam, and you'll be given an option to select a testing window that's conveniently located near you. After you've earned your certification, you'll be required to recertify every 3 years in order to maintain your status. Now, getting started. Again, you'll need to go to our website, cfre.org, to start the application or create an account. And once you create your application, this is where you'll track the 3 main requirements for the application, which is education, your professional practice, and your professional performance. And please keep in mind that everything you're listing in the application has to have occurred within the past 5 years from your submission date. If you do have any questions, please always feel free to contact us directly, and that includes if you would like to go over your application before you submit. As you can see here, this is the landing page for our website. Once you come here, cfre.org, you'll be able to sign into your application in 2 different ways. You can see up here where the login is. If you mouse over that and click on My CFRE, that'll take you to the login page, as well as down here, this little icon of a monitor with a person on it will also take you to where you can access your account. So here's the login page. So once you click on those links that I showed you previously in the last slide. This is where you'll go to log in. If you already are a registered user, you'll type your email address and your password here. If you are having trouble with your password, you can always reset it here. If you don't have an account, you'll want to click here to register. And then you'll go through a short process filling out demographic information, things like your address, your name, how long you've been in the industry, a few demographic questions, and then moving on to the application itself. So a lot of people start the process by asking, am I eligible to apply to become a CFRE? Well, in order to determine that, you'll need to take a look at a couple of things in your portfolio of experience. One is professional practice. Now, this is where you're looking at your employment as a fundraiser or fundraising consultant. You need a minimum of 36 months over the past 5 years, and they do not need to be consecutive. So if there were breaks in your employment, that's okay, as long as there's a cumulative total of 36 months within the past 5 years. The education piece requires 80 hours total. You earn 1 point per hour of attendance at eligible fundraising related sessions. You can also earn 10 points for each bachelor's, master's, or associate's degree, bachelor's, master's, or doctorate, or 5 points for an associate. Now, degrees are the exception to the 5-year rule. They do not need to have been conferred within the past 5 years, and they do not need to be fundraising specific to qualify. For professional performance, this is where you're documenting your successes as a fundraiser, either through actual funds that you've brought in or through projects that you've completed for your fundraising program. Now, points are awarded at a ratio of 1 point per every 25,000 US dollars raised, or 5 points per project. There will be a currency conversion link within the application if you're raising funds in non-US dollars, and you'll be able to translate those over to US dollars to include in the application. The last piece is abiding by the Donor Bill of Rights. We do expect all CFREs to abide by the International Statement of Ethical Principles in Fundraising, as well as the CFRE accountability standards. Again, going back to education, this is going to be the first section in the application where you start to document your data. This is under step 2, enter qualifications, and education will be the first piece. Again, a total of 80 points is required, and you earn 1 point per hour of attendance. That's the standard ratio for everything you attend that's eligible for credit. Points, again, must have been earned within the past 5 years to qualify. Now, we'll go on to review some specific examples of what is eligible as education types and what's commonly used, and as well as things that aren't eligible. So you can see here, again, academic degrees, which is not required, but certainly you're welcome to include all academic degrees that you have earned for up to a maximum of 40 points. And again, all majors are accepted, and academic degrees can exceed the 5-year time frame. It is 5 points for an associate's and 10 points for a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctorate. Now, typical items that people include in the application for their education requirement include conferences, workshops, and webinars. Those are the 3 most common ones. Most of the things that you'll be inputting into the application will either be listed as a conference or a class, and we'll be reviewing that more in detail shortly, but just keep that in mind as you're filling out the application. If you're attending a conference, listed as a conference. If it was anything else, whether it be a webinar, a workshop, an association meeting, a local chapter meeting, that's all going to be designated as a class in the application. Now, presenting at conferences, workshops, and webinars also qualifies for points in the education piece. Please remember that when you're doing any presenting, it cannot be a part of your employment responsibilities, and the presentation does have to be on a fundraising related topic. You can also earn points by authoring articles, books, or book chapters for a maximum of 36 points towards that education requirement of 80. Again, anytime you author or write articles, it cannot be a part of your employment responsibilities and be listed as education. Anytime you do a presentation or develop content for a book or an article for your organization as part of your employment, that can be listed as professional performance. Service learning is also a great way to earn some points towards the education requirement. Now you can get a total of up to 10 points for all of your service, volunteer service. And this does include general volunteer service, which awards 1 point per year per organization. And general volunteer service will be things like volunteering at a school or a library, a homeless shelter. It doesn't need to be fundraising related. It can be any type of just general volunteering that you do outside the scope of your employment. Volunteer leadership awards 2 points per year, and that's where you would be serving on a board or a committee for any type of association. It doesn't really matter what your role was on that committee or board. Regardless, you can still list that as volunteer leadership and get up to 2 points per year per organization. Finally, non-fundraising related courses can be used to earn up to 10 points as well. Now, this is where you're listing any type of professional development that you've done that is not fundraising specific. So some examples would include technology courses or project management courses, things like a creative writing course to help you write better. The difference being if you take a specific grant writing course, that's going to be fundraising education because it's writing that applies to developing grants, whereas if you take just a general writing course that can be applied across sector that's not specific to a fundraising topic, that would be considered non-fundraising education. And you can earn up to 10 points across all of that. Now, one of the main questions that people submit to us is, does my education qualify? So there are a couple of things you'll want to look at when determining whether or not your education qualifies. And if you're still confused, don't hesitate to contact us, reach out to us and let us know. Send us a link to the program and say, I'm just unsure if this qualifies, can you please verify? But one easy way to make that determination on your own is to take a look at our CFRE test content outline. If the content of your education is directly related to fundraising as outlined in the test content outline, then it will more than likely qualify. Now, there's 6 domains listed on the CFRE test content outline. If your education falls within any of those domains and any of those subtopics, again, it should be eligible. But if you're still not certain, again, feel free to send that to us for review and we'll be happy to make that determination for you. As far as presentations are concerned, do not list presentations as education if they were part of your employment responsibilities. If you are invited as a guest speaker to present at a session at a conference, that is something that would be eligible. If you are presenting to your staff about a fundraising topic, or if you're going out and doing a presentation on your own organization, that is ineligible as education, but rather could be listed as professional performance because it's related to your job. Finally, we ask that you do not try to guess the number of hours that you list for the education that you attend. You'll need to be very clear and very specific about those hours. Again, it's 1 point per hour of attendance for each class, conference, webinar that you go to and attend, whether it's online or in person. Most of the time you'll find that approved education providers will have tracker sheets for you to use that will have an easy write-up for you to reference to determine the number of hours you spent at each session. You'll find them typically at AFP conferences or other conferences where they have been submitted to us for pre-approval. But generally it's 1 point per hour of attendance. If it's under 45 minutes, it is not eligible. So now we're going to get into the application itself. From this screen, you can see we're on step 2, enter qualifications. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is the bulk of the application where you're going to be documenting your education, practice, and performance, the meat of what you're submitting. This will be an example of how to include a conference in the application. So as you can see from the various drop-down menus, the first step is to select the education type. Now the options here will be either service learning, continuing education, or academic degree. So this one is continuing education, and then the education type is conference. And again, on this drop-down menu, you'll find various other items. We'll go through those as well. And this one in particular is related to conferences, how to add a conference to the application. Now, if you're going to an AFP conference, this is fundraising related, so make sure that the fundraising related button is selected. You'll name the activity organizer, in this case AFP. We do ask that at least, if you're going to continue to use acronyms in your application, to please spell it out at least once so that we can refer to that in case we're unfamiliar with the organization. Now for the name of the session, you can just list, this example says really big conference. Obviously that's not the name of an AFP conference. When you're filling this out, if you attended AFP Icon, for instance, you can say name of session was AFP Icon 2018. Now we know that at conferences, you'll be faced with various presenters throughout the sessions that you attend. So when it asks you for the presenter, you do not need to go through and list each presenter from all the sessions that you attended. You can list something to the effect of various or multiple, and that'll be fine. Here you'll enter in the start and end dates of the conference. You can either type them manually, and please be aware that the format the dates must be entered in. As you can see here, it's month, date, and then 4 digits for the year. If you're having issues, you can always click on this little calendar icon to the right of the box, and then that will bring up a calendar that you can select dates from instead of having to type them manually. Right here is where you're entering in the number of hours that you spent at those sessions. And again, you're not guessing, it's 1 point per hour. So if you go to a 4-day conference and you attend 5 hours worth of sessions throughout that 4-day conference, you'd put 5 here. And finally, you're selecting your role. If you are an attendee, that's what you would select attendee here. If you were a presenter, you would select the presenter role. If you did both at a conference, please be sure to list those as separate entries, as points are awarded at different ratios for being an attendee and for being a presenter. Right here is where you're entering in a class. So the last one we did was a conference, and as I mentioned, there are other options to select from continuing education type. Conference and class will be the 2 most prevalent ones that you'll be selecting. In the case of a class, you'll find that this applies more to like 1-hour sessions that you go to, whether it's an AFP local chapter meeting or a workshop that you do or a webinar. All of those are going to fall under the general classification of the class type. And it's really the same process. You're typing in the name of the activity organizer. So in this case, case 3 was the one who offered the education. The name of the session is entered here, Cultivating Gen Z Donors. The presenter, whoever the presenter is, and you'll see the role is selected as presenter. So in this particular entry, this is being added as if the person filling out the application did the presentation on cultivating Gen Z donors. So they'd list their own name here, the date of the presentation, and how many hours they spent presenting. Now keep in mind, you're not including preparation or development time into the total contact hours. It's simply the number of hours you spent presenting. Now, based on your selection of your role, whether you're using existing materials, as this one is indicated, or the other option is using new materials, bonus points will be awarded based on this selection. And that will, once you click Save and Review, the bonus points will be added to this entry and you can view the total at that point, but do not include preparation and development time under contact hours. Here's where a conferred academic degree has been listed. So this example is Monash University. Conferred academic degree, again, is selected from education type. This is where you would select continuing education, conferred academic degree, or volunteer service. So this being a degree that was selected, the name of the university was here, and then you'll select what type of degree it was from this option. Then type in the name of the field of study, and again, it doesn't have to be fundraising related to qualify, so that's okay. And then the date conferred. So if you earned the degree in May of 1999, that would be where you would list it here. Once more, degrees do not have to be within that 5-year period to qualify. And finally, we're at volunteer service. So as you can see here, the education type selected was service learning. The organization was the Ottawa SPCA. So that's where you're listing the name of the organization you did the volunteer work for. And under the nature of service box, this is where you're selecting whether this was general volunteer service or volunteer leadership. Again, general volunteer service is any type of service where it was going to help out in any capacity that wasn't part of a board or a committee. Volunteer leadership is designed for committee and board membership only. So if you did serve on a board or a committee, you would select volunteer leadership for that role. And then start and end dates can be listed here. If the volunteer opportunity is still ongoing, then you would just select the ongoing box. Somebody would enter in qualifications if they did any type of authoring. Again, this falls under continuing education. The education type would be selected as author. And then it does have to be fundraising related to qualify. Anytime you do a presentation or author any materials, it has to be fundraising specific. So as you can see here, the title of the publication is Engaging Your Board. The author would be your name, because you're the one who authored this material. If somebody else authored it, it should not be entered in as an author type. The publisher will be listed here, and then your role will either be author of an article, author of a chapter, or author of a book. You must include the date of the publication and either a link to the publication or a copy of the publication. If you do include a link, please be sure it's accessible by us. Sometimes we'll see people submit links that are behind a paywall, so you would need a membership in order to view the article or something of that nature. That won't be enough, that won't be sufficient for us to review the article. So it would have to be in some capacity where we're actually able to see it. Anytime you do a book, an article, or a chapter, it cannot be a self-published item. It has to be submitted through a peer review process. So if you publish something through your through your organization's own publishing department, it's not eligible, unfortunately. It would have to be peer reviewed through a third-party organization to qualify. And this is where academic courses are entered. Now, academic course is the education type that seems to trip up people the most. This type is designated solely for classes that you take through a university, ones that award semester or quarter credit towards a conferred degree. If you take a class at a university through a certificate program and it doesn't award semester or quarter credits, it should not be listed as an academic course. It should be listed as a class. Academic courses, again, only apply to courses that award semester or quarter credit toward a degree. So here you would type the institution name, the name of the class, and the start and end dates. So it would either be a 1 semester long or a quarter semester long within that date range. And then here are the selections, quarter, semester, so you have to make a determination of what type of class it was. And then, for semester courses, this example says 10, but typically we'll see a 3-hour semester credit course. And the reason this is a very specific category is because academic courses award 15 points per semester credit or 10 points per quarter credit. So you have to be very careful when you're adding something as an academic course. If you attended a conference and listed as an academic course and put 10 hours, it's going to multiply that by 15 and give you some really high number. If you see something like that in your application and you're not sure why you see numbers that seem too high or very suspicious, potentially the reason why is because it was listed incorrectly as an academic course. You can always feel free to ping us and let us know if something looks odd in your application, and we can review that with you and make sure everything was listed correctly. Now, once you're done listing all of your education, you'll have a summary page that's part of the, whenever you click that save button, it'll take you back to the summary page here. And the summary page is where you can do a couple things. The Add Education button is here. This is where you click on to add each of these different instances of education that you attend. So every time you want to add something, you'll need to click this Add Education button. Otherwise, this serves as a summary of everything you've listed. So you can see here that it does track your point values based on what you've included, so you don't have to go and add them up yourself. The system will keep track of that for you. You'll notice that this one is in red because the 80-point requirement hasn't been met. Once you hit 80 based on what you've typed into the application, this will turn green and let you know that you've hit that 80-point mark. You'll also notice that in this particular instance, this Council on Foundations Move Management presentation was awarded 0 points. There are a couple reasons why items will award 0 points. One is if you've reached the cap among other entries. So let's say you've earned 36 points across other entries where you've listed presentations. Any additional presentations are going to show as 0 points being awarded. This one in particular had 0 points because it was outside the 5-year window of eligibility. So you can see this was from 2013, and as we're now in 2019, only items from 2014 onward are eligible. So when typing things into your application, here are a few tips that'll really facilitate the process and make not only it easier for you as you're typing this information to save time with the data entry, but also when it comes time to review, it'll make the process a lot easier and prevent any applications from being sent back for clarification or for additional information. I do recommend listing a few hours of education just in case anything is rejected. You'll have those extra hours as sort of a cushion. So if you list 85 hours of education and I have to reject 5 hours from something that you listed, you'll still have the 80 hours that you need. Don't forget, when you are documenting number of hours, whether it's for conferences or workshops, you're never to include time spent networking, breaks, or meals. Those are not eligible. It's only the time you spend under instruction that qualify. As I mentioned earlier, please spell out any acronyms at least once if you're listing an organization multiple times. And that is to prevent any confusion as we're reviewing the application. A lot of the times people will list acronyms for organizations that I'm not familiar with, and I'll have to send it back to them for clarification because I don't know whether or not that organization provides the type of education that is eligible. I will say that education does not need to be pre-approved by us to qualify. Again, you'll reference the test content outline to make the determination whether it's fundraising specific and whether it's potentially eligible. Don't list non-fundraising courses as fundraising education. This seems pretty intuitive, but we still see this all the time. And I think when this really applies is when people are listing those general courses. Again, the example I mentioned earlier was a writing course. If you take a writing course through a university, but it's not writing that's specific to fundraising, don't list that course as fundraising education. It would be non-fundraising because it could be applied across sector, depending on whether you're in accounting or you're doing volunteer service, or if whatever your role is. If you're just doing a general writing class, that would have to be listed as non-fundraising education. Even if you can apply it towards your work, if the content wasn't specific to fundraising itself, it has to be listed as non-fundraising. And again, I mentioned this earlier as well, anytime you list presentations for a conference that you attended, both presented and attended at those sessions, list those as separate entries because points are awarded at different values. This is a great tip. We do randomly audit 10% of all submitted applications. Now, in the case of an audit, we will ask for supporting documentation, and we've seen in the past where some people have changed employers and lost access to their supporting documentation. So anytime you register for a conference, a webinar, whatever it is you're attending, and they send you either supporting documentation or a certificate of completion, a registration confirmation, or receipt, I highly recommend putting those in a personal email box so that you will never lose access to that in case we need you to provide that for verification purposes. Now we're going to take a quick break and answer any questions that you have. Ashley will be asking a couple questions. And Ashley, do we have anything in?
We do. We've got quite a few here. The first one is, do we need to send documentation proving we attended a conference?
That's a great question. So the answer is no, not unless you're one, randomly selected for an audit, or two, the reviewer requests that supporting documentation for a specific item you've listed. Otherwise, this is an honor-based application system. You do have to sign in accountability standards, and that is to confirm that what you've listed is accurate, and you're providing this information as accurately as possible, and being ethically sound as well.
Excellent. Is there a value for me to list out any education I did prior to 2014?
If you're going to submit your application this year, then no. Really, we're looking back at a 5-year period. So I would say it's probably, to save yourself some time, I wouldn't include anything that's outside of the 5-year window of eligibility. A lot of times people will list an entire portfolio of their experience. It's not necessary, and it may, in fact, impede the speed of your review. So I would recommend leaving anything that's not eligible, that's outside of the 5-year window, off of your application.
Great. Can you list education sessions that are not from pre-approved providers?
Yes, absolutely. So education does not need to be offered through an approved provider to qualify. Again, as long as it's fundraising specific, you can list it as fundraising related, and you'll want to check the test content outline or reach out to us if you need confirmation of whether or not it qualifies as fundraising related.
Very good. If you have attended some courses towards a master's but not completed the master's, can you earn any points for that?
That is a great question. So here's my recommendation. There are 2 ways to list courses taken towards a degree program in the application. If the degree was earned outside of the 5-year window, it's still eligible as a degree as a whole. If the courses towards the degree program were taken within the 5-year window, I would recommend listing the degrees instead of the, I would recommend listing the courses instead of the degree, as you'll earn more points for the individual courses, because those will be listed as academic courses, which award 15 points per semester credit. Keeping in mind that they, in order to receive full credit, they'd have to be fundraising related courses, or if you list them as non-fundraising, there's a cap of 10 points.
Awesome. Let's see, if you've completed a certificate program that was self-paced, how do you estimate the total hours if we can't remember exactly what you spent?
That can be a little tricky. I would suggest contacting our office, and we can review the program agenda together, or you may be able to reach out into the education provider and ask them. A lot of times, even though they're self-paced programs, they'll have a figure on the number of content hours that the program was worth. So if that's not available on the program website, then feel free to contact us and we can review that together.
Okay, excellent. All right, and I'm just going to do one last question here. Okay, this question is asking, I've already input every session individually for a conference I attended. Do you recommend that I delete those and instead create one entry for the conference overall?
Not at all. Feel free to leave them like that. You're certainly welcome to list the individual sessions or consolidate them into one entry. Both ways are acceptable. And in fact, it may be in your best interest to list the individual sessions. And the reason I suggest that is because a lot of times people will just list the date range and consolidate that into one entry, and they'll list 8 hours of education for every single day at that conference. And that is a red flag for us. That'll be sent back for additional information. And at that point, you may be asked to list each of the individual sessions you attended. So while it's okay to consolidate conference entries into a singular entry, it's also okay to list them individually, and it may be to your benefit to do it that way. But in the interest of saving time, feel free to consolidate it as well.
All right, great. I'll turn it back to you.
Great. So we'll be moving on now to the professional practice. This is going to be the easiest section of the application to fill out. This is simply where you're documenting your employment history as a fundraiser or fundraising consultant. You earn a maximum of 1 point per month of employment, and that includes whether you're working as a full-time or part-time staff member at a nonprofit or as a consultant. Now, please be aware that if you are doing both staff work at a nonprofit and consulting on the side, you can, and those are occurring concurrently, that you still cannot earn more than 1 point per month. So it's always a maximum of 1 point per month, regardless of the number of employers you have during that specific month. Again, all of this must be earned within the past 5 years to qualify. If you're a full-time employee, Your job description must list at least 50% of what you do to be fundraising related. If you're a part-time employee, 100% of your duties must be fundraising related to qualify. So in the application itself, again, we're back at step 2, enter qualifications. Now we're on the professional practice section. And as you're navigating through this application, you can use this menu on the left to quickly move to each of these sections. So you don't have to start at step 1 and then click continue to get back to professional practice each time. You can click on it on the left-hand menu to go directly to that page. And this is again where you're adding your employment history. So for instance, in this particular example, Girls in STEM Careers is the organization. This individual is a member of the development staff, and they've listed their title, whatever their specific title must be. We just use a general placeholder as fundraiser. Start date and end dates will be listed here. If you're still employed with that organization, make sure this box is checked. Otherwise, you'll just list the end date. Again, please pay special attention to the format for the dates, which are right here. It's you know, they have to be listed in this format or the application will give you an error message and you won't be able to save the entry. Now, country codes are, country codes are specific to the country that you live in. Those should auto-populate, but if it doesn't, you know, your country code can be found. Just Google what your international country code is, and that'll give you the number that you need to put into that box. You'll type in the phone number here for your employer. And you must check this I agree box in order for the save and review or save and add another button to become clickable. If this isn't checked, then this entry will not save. So that's a really easy step, you know, entering in your experience as a fundraiser. And you can do that for all of the employments that you've had over the course of the past 5 years that are related to the requirement. So this is now an example of how to enter in professional practice as a consultant. Now there is one extra step if you're a consultant to adding this entry, and that is to include a client list, as you can see here. So basically the top portion is nearly the same. You're typing your employer name, your title, and then under your role, instead of selecting staff member, you select consultant. You'll enter in your start date, your end date, if it's applicable, or otherwise click the still employed box. And again, country code and phone number are listed here, and then you must check this I agree box. Now, once you select your consultant role here, you'll see this client list box here will appear on the screen. It won't be there until you select the consultant role. Once this populates, this is where you're typing in all the consultants that you've worked with that you wish to include. You certainly don't have to be comprehensive about it. You just need to cover a span of 36 months of client work to meet the requirements. So I will say that as we move on to the next section, performance, anytime you list performance for a client, it must also be included in the client list. So the practice and the performance sections, they must match whether you're a member of staff or a consultant. And I'll talk more about that later. Now, after you finish adding the client information, you always have to click the Add Client button and it'll populate it on the list down here. I recommend doing 3 to 5 at a time and then saving it, making sure it's saved, and if it does, then come back and adding the rest if you need to. If you do more than 3 to 5, and let's say you click Save and Review and something errors out, you may potentially end up losing all the data that you typed. So I always recommend just doing a few at a time and then saving it. You can always come back and add more later. Once you've added the professional practice entries, you'll come back to the summary page. Just as with the education section, there's a summary page for each of the 3 items. Education, practice, and performance will all have summary pages that you can review. It'll show you point totals. And as you can see here, it's green because they have met the minimum requirement of 36 months. Now we have time for a few more questions related to professional practice.
All right, thank you. Here's one. I started as a development officer and received a promotion, and I'm now a director of fundraising within the same organization. Do I need to put those in as separate entries? So essentially, if you've had more than one job title at the same organization, how do you reflect that?
That's a great question. I would say it would be in your best interest to list both, and that's simply because if you are audited, we would, if you're audited and you list your director of development role as being over the past 5 years, when in fact it was only the past 2 years, there may be some question about that when that's submitted to your employer for review. So I would say list, each position that you've had within that organization as a separate entry.
Okay, great. Is it possible to have someone look over my application before I submit and pay?
Yes, absolutely. We're very happy to do that. Feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call, and we can schedule a time to review the application together. And we'll go through it, and I'll point out any red flags or anything that I feel like needs adjustments before you submit, and that'll really help facilitate the approval process as well.
Excellent. All right. Here's a question about recertification, which we actually don't cover in this webinar, but someone is asking if you have to pay the same amount to recertify each year.
So recertification occurs every 3 years from your initial certification date. And the fee, there is a fee to recertify. It is not the $875 fee. It is a different rate. So standard recertification fee is $510. If you do belong to one of our partner organizations, that's discounted to $408. And again, that's every 3 years.
Very good. Is pro bono work completed as a consultant counted differently than paid employment as a consultant? I noticed there was a box to check for pro bono work.
That's a great question. No, it is treated the same. However, in order for pro bono work to qualify, there must still be a contract in place between the consultant and the client. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that it's not a volunteer fundraising position. It has to be, a legitimate position, employment position where there's a contract in place, whether or not it's pro bono, whether or not fees are being paid for services rendered. As long as there's a contract in place, pro bono work is eligible.
Okay, very good. Let's just see here. Here's one. Do you categorize alumni engagement as being part of fundraising / development?
Yes, absolutely. Any type of alumni engagement or prospect management of stewardship, all of those qualify as fundraising. So if that's your role, then you should still be eligible. Again, if you want to review that together before you submit, you're welcome to provide a job description, and then I can make a determination at that point.
Okay, great. All right, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, perfect. So the last section of the application is professional performance. This section is also relatively easy to complete. If you're listing funds raised, it's $1.375 million to meet the 55-point requirement. Otherwise, you can list any combination of projects or actual funds raised. Again, these must have been awarded, funds raised must have been secured within the past 5 years. Projects must have been completed within the past 5 years to be eligible. Now we know that as a fundraiser, you work very closely with other people in your department, as fundraising is, sort of a team sport. So that being said, our rule is as long as you're on a team of individuals who are responsible for raising those funds, all members of that team can claim those funds, and that does include management and directors as well. So you don't feel the need to not include something just because you weren't the sole solicitor for that gift. If it was a team effort, if you did the prospect research and then someone else made the ask, both of you can claim those funds. So, excuse me. When listing projects, don't list small items. And what that means is, for example, if you send out monthly newsletters, those are not considered projects. That's really an ongoing employment effort. So you won't want to list small items that are really, by small items, we mean things that are ongoing work efforts that you do on a daily basis or a weekly or monthly basis. Projects, as we define them, must have strategic intent, a start and end date, and significantly impact fundraising outcomes. So keep that in mind as you're listing a project.
Hi, Paul. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I'll go over this slide again, just in case you missed it. In order for a project to be eligible, it must have strategic intent, a start and end date, and have a significant impact on the fundraising program. And we'll go over examples of projects in a bit. Every item listed under professional performance should match an entry in professional practice. Now that is, again, back to what I mentioned earlier. If you list something under professional performance, so let's say you list an organization that you raised money for under professional performance, but that organization isn't listed under your professional practice, we would have to send that back for clarification. Volunteer fundraising opportunities are not eligible as professional performance. Only fundraiser projects completed for your employer qualify. So if you're a consultant and you list that you raised funds for a client under performance, but that client wasn't listed under practice, we would have to send that back to you for clarification. Same goes for staff members. If you raise money for your own organization, and you list that under performance, as long as it's listed under practice as well, that same organization, you'll be fine. Don't list volunteer items under performance. Those are not eligible. So here we have an example of how to add actual funds raised. Again, it's 1 point for every $25,000 raised in US dollars. And if you are raising funds in a non-US currency, there will be an option for you to visit a currency converter website, and you'll have to type in both local currency and funds raised in US dollars within this application. It's not on, you won't see it on this screen because this is treating this as if the applicant was from the United States. When you're listing your organization, just type in the name here, the fiscal year start date, and how much money was raised. So under the funds raised box, you only need to list numerical values. You do not need to put any commas or US dollars or parentheses or anything like that, just the numerical value. Now, here's the part where people tend to trip up quite a bit, and that is under the fundraising type available box, you must select at least one of these options and move it into the chosen box in order for the entry to save. And there are two ways you can do this. You can either double click whatever the fundraising type is, and double clicking it will move it into the right box, or you can click on it once and highlight it and then click this arrow to move it over. If you accidentally add an item to the chosen box that you don't need, you can click this arrow to move it back, and that should remove it from this chosen box. This part is crucial, so you must select at least one fundraising type in order for the entry to save. Now, when you go, if you're adding projects, again, select type of professional performance is up here, and the drop-down menu, you'll be able to select management activities, communications projects, or actual funds raised. So for this example, we'll be adding a communications project. If you need examples on how to add those, there's a link right here as well. You can click on that and it will take you to our website, and there'll be a page with a bunch of examples on projects that people have included previously. The identifying information has been redacted from those, but it should give you good examples of how to write up projects. You'll include the purpose, goal, or the purpose or the goal of the project here, the types of materials used for the project or your strategy, and finally the measurable outcome, how the project affected your fundraising program. All three of these boxes must be completed in order for the project to be eligible. And there really must be a measurable outcome within the fundraising program in order for the project to qualify. So if you've started a project and the project hasn't completed yet, that may be a little harder to qualify what the outcome is. That's something that we can sort of look at together if that's, if you're finding that's the case in your specific circumstance. After you've completed adding your performance projects or funds raised, everything again will be on the summary page here, just as with education and practice. There'll be a list of the items that you've listed, as well as a tracking portion here where you can see whether or not you've met the requirement or how far you need to go to meet that. If you're looking for just brief overviews of what we're talking about today, each of the three sections here, the summary pages, have additional information. Always feel free to review those, go back to those and look at them. A lot of the important information will be listed there. So again, we have some additional general application advice. We always recommend updating it a little at a time. There's no need for you to do everything at once. Anytime you type something in, you click save, it should remain there until, indefinitely, or until we do a data deletion as according to our policies. Do not enter items as TBD. We often see people they put TBD into because they need to go back and research specific items about the project, and then they'll forget they put TBD and then submit it as such. And of course, that just prolongs the review. We have to send it back to them, and they have to re-edit that entry. So just make sure you don't list any placeholders in the application. Always read and review your application before submitting, and if you do have any questions or you're uncertain about something, just let us know and we'll be happy to go over that with you. As part of the application process, this is step 4 in the application, you are required to select an exam window. We do offer 4 exam windows throughout the year. These will be consistent annually, so the windows that you're seeing now will be applicable in 2020 and moving forward. So these will never change. The exam is offered 11 out of the 12 months of the year, with the exception being in December. And again, you are required to select an exam window during step 4 of the application process. So please review that carefully. I've seen a lot of people submit applications for a window with only 5 days left in the window. And when they get the approval, they'll notice it at that point and say, oh, I want to switch my windows, and we have to, and there is a $35 fee anytime you need to switch windows. So just please be aware of the window you're selecting before you submit your application. And again, this is what the screen looks like when you are selecting an exam window. You are required to select a country. If your country is not listed there, don't worry. It does not necessarily mean that the exam is not available in your country. Give us a call and we'll figure out if the exam is being offered in your country and how to proceed from that point. Here's where you are required to select an exam window. So just use that drop-down box and make sure you select a window before you submit your application. You'll have to agree to how you listed your name in the application is how it's printed on your photo ID. This is a requirement by our testing administrator. Once you go to the exam site, they will check 2 forms of ID. Your first and last name need to match how you registered within your CFRE account. So if you need to edit your name, you have the option to do it here. Just click edit name and you can go back and do that, but it must match your photo ID in order for you to be admitted into the exam site. You're welcome to list middle names. Those will not affect entrance to the exam site. It's only first and last name. Oops, if you need special accommodations, CFRE does provide that. We would require a doctor's note indicating what special accommodations are required, and you have the option to upload those within the application itself, or you can send it to us via email. If you are requesting special accommodations, there is a separate process that you'll need to go through to schedule your exam, and that information will be sent to you at that time. You can upload those supporting documents either through the website here, or you can mail it to us, and our mailing address is here as well, and you can email those as well. So, how do you find a center that's close to you? You can do this at any time. You don't even need to have an application in process to locate an exam site. Just go to the URL on your screen, pearsonview.com/CFRE, and there'll be an option for you to locate an exam site. And this is what that screen looks like. So you can type in any sort of identifying information, such as a zip code, a city, and it will show you what sites are close to you. And you should have plenty of options depending on where you are. Usually travel is not involved, or at least a large travel is not involved. There are some cases where there may not be an exam site close to you and you may have to travel. Just be aware of that as you're reviewing what's available. And as far as recommendations go, you'll see the test sites listed here. These are all third-party exam sites. You will notice that sometimes you'll see Pearson VUE professional sites that are offering the exam as well. Those are my recommendation if you have the option of taking the exam at a Pearson VUE professional site, to take it there instead of a third-party site. They are managed directly through Pearson VUE, and so we have better communication with those exam sites. So once you've completed the application, you've met all the requirements in the education, practice, and performance section, and you've selected your exam window, you'll move on to where you are agreeing to the International Statement of Ethical Principles in Fundraising. So in this section here, you're checking the agree box and listing your initials, abiding by all of these things listed here. Please note that initials are limited to just your first and last letter, the first letter of your first name and the first letter of your last name. If you have 3 names, if you use a middle name, if you have a hyphenated last name, it's still going to be the first letter of your first name and the first letter of the last name. So for instance, this one is listed as Ashley Gatewood. So you can see she entered in AG, but let's say her name was Ashley Gatewood Smith, hyphenated Gatewood Smith. Her initials would still be AG. It wouldn't be AG-S. It wouldn't be AS. It would be AG only. So keep that in mind if you have a name with more than 2, just a first and last name. On the next screen, we're agreeing to the CFRE accountability standards, and this is where you verify that you're abiding by our code of ethics, that what you've included in your application is accurate. And you'll have to initial and agree to these 3 sections as well as our appeals policy. Once you've completed the ethics section, you'll go to the final application checklist. And this is where you'll see check marks next to each of the sections that you've met the requirements for. If there was a section that you missed that you did not meet the requirement for, there would be a red X. You would have to go back to that section and complete it before you could move forward. So submitting your application. You pay only when you submit. So you can always work on your application. You can create an application at any time. There is no requirement to submit a payment until you have met all the application requirements and are ready to submit for review. There's only one fee for initial certification. That fee is the $875 fee, or the $700 discounted rate, and that covers your application processing, review, and your first exam attempt. If you do require additional exam attempts, you are allowed 2 retake attempts, and those are $375 each. And there is a 30-day waiting period before you can retest. Now, we do encourage candidates to pay by credit card. If you are paying by check, there is a $50 check processing fee added onto the total. If at any point during the review there is questions about something in your application, if information is missing or we just require clarification, we will send the application back to you. We know you've already submitted your payment. You're not outright disqualified. You are always offered an opportunity to correct any deficiencies in the application and still sit for the exam. And your payment will be honored from the date you submitted. And you have 1 year to fulfill any deficiencies and still be eligible to test. Once you have completed any additional information request, you are required to resubmit the application, but no additional fees will be incurred. As I mentioned earlier, as part of being an accredited certification program, we are required to audit 10% of all applications, which are randomly selected by our database. So if you do get chosen for an audit. It wasn't anything in your application that caused the audit to occur. It's our database just randomly choosing every 10th application. And remember, save all of your documentation in a personal email account if possible, and don't panic. If you do get selected for an audit, just remember, we're not the IRS. I'll work with you closely one-on-one to ensure that it is a quick process. I don't need to verify everything that you list in the application, so we can go through it together and pull out items that you can submit the supporting documentation for. And usually the audit doesn't take more than a couple of days, depending on how easily accessible that information is. So after you submit your application, what are the next steps? Well, obviously you'll want to prepare for the exam. And certainly you're welcome to start doing that even before you submit your application. As you prepare for the exam, we do have resources available on our website. Those resources are on the study aid section of the application at CFRE.org. And plan to study at least 40 hours. We did a survey recently, and the general consensus was candidates spend on average 40 hours studying to prepare themselves for the exam. And that's our presentation for today. If you have any questions or would like to reach out to a CFRE ambassador, please feel free to email share@cfre.org, and Ashley will connect you with an ambassador in your area. Ambassadors are a great resource for many things, and Ashley will be able to talk more about the ambassador program, based on the emails that she receives. Thank you very much.
And Paul, I know we're at time. We have a couple of questions. If everyone has a couple minutes to hang on the line, or if you need to leave because we are at time, that's fine. But Paul, would you have time to take maybe 3 questions?
Absolutely, yes, please.
Okay. If you lapse in your certification, so you don't recertify after 3 years, do you need to complete the initial certification process again?
Yes, that's a great question. Unfortunately, you would be required to restart the process as an initial candidate and pay that $700 or $875 fee and resit for the exam. So, recertification candidates do have a 6-month grace period. If they don't get their application in by their deadline, they're automatically offered an additional 6 months to do so. But after that grace period ends, if you wish to regain your CFRE status, you would have to reapply as an initial candidate.
Okay, excellent. Now, what would happen if your job role stayed the exact same, but only your job title changed? Is there anything special that needs to be done in the application around that?
Not really. I would, if you're listing professional practice, I would just go ahead and list them as 2 separate entries, just to be clear, but it won't really affect anything else. So you should be okay.
Okay, great. Is managing a special event such as a golf tournament able to qualify as a community project?
Yeah, managing an event would qualify as a project. You'll want to consider 2 things before listing that as a project. If funds, if you can document funds raised as a result of that special event, you want to weigh whether or not you'll get more points that way, because it's 5 points per project or 1 point per $25,000 raised. So you can list it either way. If it was, if you determine that you'll not earn 5 points just from the funds raised alone, then list it as a project. Otherwise, I would list it as actual funds raised.
Excellent. Somebody's asked what's a CFRE ambassador. So that's a person that's a current CFRE that can talk to you about their experience with becoming a CFRE and how they studied. We have another question here. To qualify volunteer oversight as a management activity, would the volunteers need to be helping with something that is fundraising related?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, and that can be any type of, it can't be just general volunteers for your organization. It has to be specific to the fundraising program.
Okay, very good. Does redesigning a company website, both graphics and content, count as a communication project?
Yes, absolutely it does, especially if it was specifically related to the fundraising program, or if you're redesigning a website to allow for online donations or something to that effect. Yes, that can be considered a communications project.
Great. I've got a question here, which I think I can answer, which is how do you schedule a test window if you have to take a significant number of courses? So the thing about that is that you're not going to schedule your test window until you've taken all of those courses that you need. The test window selection is at the very end of the application process.
That's correct.
Okay, so let's see. Would a case statement qualify as an appropriate communication project?
Yeah, I think so. I think, feel free to contact me directly and we can review that together. In most cases, yes, a case statement would qualify.
Okay, excellent. All right. And here I'll do one last question here. As a donor relations professional, can I count our division meeting our fundraising goal of $20 million? If so, should I count each year separately?
So yes and no. What I would say to that is, if all of that money was brought in as a result of a team effort, then yes, feel free to list the whole sum. If you were responsible for a specific portion of that those funds being brought in, only list that part. Just be clear. Again, you have to really take into account what your role was as a team member or as an individual fundraiser. Again, if you were only responsible for a specific portion of those funds being brought in, just list that part, but otherwise feel free for all team members to list the whole sum.
Okay, great. Sorry, I said that last one was our last question, but a really good one's right here.
Sure.
If you add a performance project from an employer for whom you no longer work, what kind of backup documentation will you need to be able to provide for the project to be eligible?
So it may not necessarily even come into play. Again, we don't require supporting documentation unless you've been selected for an audit or a specific request has been made. If you are selected for audit, we may not even necessarily need to verify that project. That would be something we can work on one-on-one at that point that you were chosen for audit.
All right, very good. And that's it.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Again, feel free to email any questions you have to succeed@cfre.org or give us a call anytime. And thanks for joining us.